For centuries, humanity lived in cautious isolation, overshadowed by more technologically advanced species that roamed the galaxy. We were, by all accounts, latecomers to the grand spacefaring community, known yet disregarded, recognized yet overshadowed, tolerated yet dismissed. Our technology was not the most advanced, nor our military the most formidable. Yet, from our vantage point on Earth, we believed that a higher calling defined us. Where other species sailed across the cosmos seeking resources, territory, or dominion, we sought connection, understanding, and sustainable cooperation. We had learned from our own turbulent history that exploitation had a cost greater than material price. So, by the time our ships finally ventured into interstellar space, bending wormholes and forging connections with distant star clusters, we resolved not to repeat old mistakes. We would not exploit, subjugate, or pillage anyone, no matter how tempting the promise of instant gain. In a universe full of conquerors and opportunists, we insisted on a moral code. Many of the dominant powers in the galaxy found us curious, if not naive. The Rabraxi, large reptilian bipeds with advanced hyperdrives, laughed when we introduced ourselves. Their trade consortium spanned hundreds of solar systems, and their government was shaped by centuries of resource absorption. The very idea of leaving an unguarded, mineral-rich world unexploited was to them unthinkable. They embodied a brutally efficient approach to expansion. Scour a planet for resources, uproot the local species if necessary, and monopolize or eradicate any formidable adversary. When we arrived offering trade terms that explicitly protected local ecosystems and populations, they laughed again. They deemed us novices who lacked the will to flourish. Or, so they said, in their official dispatches. Still, they allowed us access to a small trading station on the outskirts of their territory, a charitable, if condescending, gesture. Likewise, the Arluma had little interest in forging deeper ties. They were a coalition of mammalian species that prided themselves on genetic engineering. Decades prior, Arluma scientists had discovered a technique to accelerate reproduction and physical enhancement in other species, turning docile populations into unstoppable labor forces. They effectively raised entire life forms as raw biological fuel for their empire's economic machine. When a human delegation tried to negotiate the release of forcibly bred subjects, the Arluma ambassadors wore condescending smiles. Their only concession was to obligingly sign a non-aggression pact, but they had no intention of changing their ways for the sake of a species they considered inconsequential upstarts. Humanity's moral stance, as word spread, came to be an object of sardonic fascination at best and utter ridicule at worst. We offered relocation and protection for species threatened by more powerful interstellar powers, but few believed we would follow through. Our altruism seemed impossible to sustain, especially as our limited resource base strained under the demands of interstellar travel. Among the gargantuan alliances that wielded unimaginable weaponry, it seemed only a matter of time before humanity would be forced to compromise. But our perseverance was real. We formed alliances with smaller, less powerful species that understood, or at least appreciated, our stance. On newly discovered worlds, where the local fauna had a chance at self-awareness, we established conservation protocols rather than strip mining them. We taught the value of coexistence, offering to share technology, medical support, and educational resources in the hope that we could cultivate mutual respect. Our scientists, engineers, and diplomats knocked on doors across the galaxy, guided by a principle as old as our earliest civilizations, a respect for life in all its forms. This was not always met with open arms, but unflinching consistency built a reputation that spread in whispers. In time, unthinkable rumors started to emerge. In the distant sectors occupied by the barbarous Kesht, humans had rescued entire villages of an indigenous species from forced labor. In the empire of the Yadrin, threatened by internal rebellion, human surgeons volunteered to treat the wounded on both sides. That we protected the weak reached corners of the galaxy where cunning and force had decided fates for millennia. Despite our unimpressive naval fleets, we grew into a presence that one could neither ignore nor easily trample. Still, we lived in a precarious peace, overshadowed by the giants who gave us no second thought until new trouble appeared on galactic horizons. It began with a scattered wave of attacks on outlying colonies near the spiral's rim. A mysterious group, rumored to be well-armed and secretive, struck swiftly. They did not merely raid, they obliterated. They turned environments to ash, shattered orbital platforms, and tortured or exterminated entire settlements. Survivor accounts were cryptic. Mechanized drones with no living pilots, plasmic artillery discharging from cloaked ships, and a physiology behind it all that nobody had encountered before. The attacks were random, hitting the outskirts of powerful empires and humble outposts alike. A new menace lurked beyond the known charts. The major galactic powers, the Rabraxi, Arluma, and others, responded with immediate attempts at militaristic containment. But the enemy's technology proved elusive in ways none had anticipated. The Rabraxi fleets, though massive, were disorganized without consistent supply lines. They quickly became bogged down along the borders, losing thousands of craft to the unknown force. The Arluma tried to accelerate their breeding programs, engineering super soldiers among their subjugated species, but their forced genetic enhancements only led to a rebellion behind the lines, fracturing their defenses. Soon, it seemed the entire ring of civilized space was under threat, and no conventional approach was working. Amid the chaos, a few smaller species reached out to an unlikely source for help. They came to humans. These threatened worlds had virtually no standing armies, but they remembered that humans had offered them safe harbor in the past. The founding principle of humanity's alliance was mutual respect, ethically grounded cooperation, and defense of the innocent. Lacking the resources to fight on multiple fronts, they showed up pleading for humanitarian aid, for help evacuating threatened populations, and for any technology that might turn the tide. The large powers wouldn't spare them, and indeed had no inclination to help. But humans, small though we were, had grown strong enough to stand for them. We did not turn them away. Our earliest major mobilization in galactic affairs became a refugee rescue mission. Human ships, many newly minted and outfitted with advanced shielding based on borrowed technology from the few open-minded species, embarked on countless journeys. They evacuated entire settlements, caring for the wounded and feeding the hungry, and for the first time, our unwavering refusal to exploit anyone in need paid unexpected dividends. Those we helped were not forced to pledge military service or sign away future resources. They simply accepted sanctuary. And it was that very gesture of genuine benevolence, a rarity in this cutthroat galaxy, that sparked a surprising shift. Unbeknownst to most of the large empires, we had quietly cultivated relationships with hundreds of smaller species over decades. Though each group alone was economically weak or militarily powerless or technologically backward, together they began to form an unspoken coalition. Their combined knowledge, manpower, and specialized skills were freely offered to humanity in gratitude for our help. The Tucati, tiny but brilliant amphibians, contributed quantum cryptography breakthroughs for secure communications. The Velrax, an insectoid hive with unparalleled proficiency in mechanical construction, donated specialized exoskeleton suits and mass scale fabrication plants. The Boniri, a gentle species of winged bipeds repressed by the Arluma for their psionic potential, offered telepathic insight and advanced medical knowledge. Seemingly overnight, humans became the unexpected pivot in a grand alliance of the overlooked. We fashioned an improvised war council. Ship captains, scientists, refugees, and diplomats gathered in hidden starbases well outside the major trade routes. We exchanged data on the invaders, every recovered drone fragment, every sensor reading, every rumor gleaned from survivors. Through the Tucati's quantum cryptography, we established a secure network, outsmarting the eavesdropping attempts of bigger powers. The stolen or purchased bits of advanced technology we'd collected from various corners of the galaxy proved an unorthodox patchwork. But it gave our new coalition a fighting chance. We began producing a new fleet of vessels, each combining the best elements of Allied engineering, each crewed by volunteers from dozens of species who admired humanity's principles. When the mysterious invaders next struck, it was in the Irani sector, home to a once peaceful maritime race called the Ceruleans. Our coalition responded in full force. Humans commanded the flagship, but the fighter wings comprised pilots from many backgrounds. The sabotage teams included agile insectoids and psionic Boniri scouts. The engineering decks were staffed by the Velrax, who swapped out defective parts with rapid precision. For the first time, the enemy faced a united front that was not beholden to exploitation, fear, or the ambitions of a single empire. Our new alliance fought with an unfamiliar coherence. Instead of relying on raw brutality, we leveraged synergy. And it worked. The invaders retreated and left behind enough salvage that our scientists could glean precious knowledge about their nature. We discovered that these attackers were not entirely unknown. Old data archives from pre-literate times mentioned a species called the Iratha, rumored to be an exiled offshoot of the Rabraxi, genetically altered to be perfect conquerors. They had developed a singular culture dedicated to the assimilation of resources at all costs, and in ancient times, the Rabraxi had banished them to the galaxy's outer rim. Now the Iratha had returned as a technologically twisted juggernaut. Their drones were laced with living neural tissue, an abomination that integrated the minds of enslaved species. No wonder they were unstoppable. Their entire society operated as a single war engine. If left unchecked, they would burn through each sector until all life was bent to their machine intelligence synergy. This revelation prompted us to broadcast an urgent call to the major powers. Even the haughty Rabraxi, who pretended not to need allies, could not survive such a threat alone. We extended a plea for a summit. To our surprise, the Rabraxi accepted, albeit grudgingly. The Arluma also sent delegates, likely recognizing that their empire, shaken by internal revolts, might crumble under the Iratha onslaught. Other powers soon followed suit. The summit took place on a neutral station once owned by the Merchants Guild, an enormous installation with grand translucent domes offering panoramic views of the cosmic expanse. Humans and our allied species organized the event and guaranteed the neutrality of the grounds. We insisted again on one central principle: no exploitation and no forced subjugation. We asked that all parties cooperate without demanding subservience from weaker species. The heads of the major powers grumbled, mumbled about wasted potential, and pointed out that militaristic discipline was necessary to face an existential threat. But they had little choice. Even their formidable dreadnoughts had failed to repel the Iratha. They needed numbers, new ideas, fresh willpower, and we were the gatekeepers to a crucial pool of diverse allies. Despite being overshadowed by the sheer grandeur of the other races' war machines, our coalition's moral backbone commanded unexpected influence in the summit's negotiation. The smaller species that rallied around us were unwilling to ally themselves with the bigger empires unless certain guarantees were made. The freedom of subject worlds, humane treatment of prisoners, a ban on weaponizing entire species through forced genetic manipulation. An uproar broke out when Arluma delegates balked at halting their breeding programs. A standoff occurred with the Rabraxi, who demanded the right to claim new territory after the war. Yet, with the Iratha threat looming, they were forced to concede more than ever before. For the first time in galactic history, an interspecies agreement took shape that explicitly outlawed forced servitude of any kind. With the summit concluded and a somewhat tenuous treaty in place, the new alliance prepared for a final stand. We had intelligence indicating that the Iratha Armada would soon converge on the Draxis Corridor, a massive nexus of wormhole gateways essential to controlling the commerce and travel routes across half the galaxy. If the Iratha controlled those gateways, every major power would be at their mercy. So we converged there first: Rabraxi battleships, Arluma carriers, the newly minted star cruisers from our coalition, each stationing themselves at strategic points, forging interlocking layers of defense. The smaller species contributed specialized roles. The winged Boniri soared across vacuum in specially adapted suits, scouting for cloaked Iratha ships. The insectoid Rabraxi dug in, with mechanical artillery, in asteroids. Meanwhile, humans acted as mediators, bridging technology interfaces, ensuring that no single species attempted sabotage against another. For a short time, the galaxy united to stop a common threat. The battle began with a hush of static on the scanners. Then, like a swarm of angry hornets, the Iratha drones poured through the wormholes by the tens of thousands. They swept into the corridor, unleashing plasmic storms that lit up the cosmic dust in violent bursts of color. Rabraxi warships opened fire, launching volley after volley of heavy torpedoes. The Arluma carriers scrambled fighter wings of genetically modified pilots, though restricted by the new treaty from forcibly enhancing them. Our motley coalition ships weaved through the chaos, exploiting every advantage gleaned from Allied technology. The synergy on display was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Arluma flight tactics, combined with Borak's mechanical precision, guided by Boniri's psychic warnings of incoming strikes, and anchored by human-designed coordination software that ensured each move was synchronized. Yet the Iratha struck back with monstrous ferocity. Their capital ships bristled with monstrous weapons, each an amalgam of biology and machine. They launched waves of living drones, each grown in horrifying vats, fused to advanced targeting systems. Every time we blasted one out of space, we sensed the faint shimmer of a stolen soul, a life form forced to pilot these abominations. There was no ignoring the moral stakes of this engagement. We weren't just engaging in a typical war to seize territory or political power. We were fighting for the foundational principle of self-determination. Under the relentless pressure, the Allied lines wavered. Rabraxi commanders, unaccustomed to coordinating with others, risked friendly fire incidents as they fired blindly into the swirling melee. The Arluma capital ships nearly collided with coalition frigates when they veered off course to protect their newly freed subordinates. Meanwhile, the Iratha systematically targeted the smaller Allied ships, hoping to cripple the synergy that bound the alliance. At times it seemed the corridor was lost, our defenses fraying under the unstoppable onslaught. But in the darkest hour, a new wave of ships appeared from behind the orbital plane. They were old designs, battered and outdated by the galaxy standards, but they flew with an unyielding determination. These were the fleets of smaller, neutral species who had once been scorned by the big powers, and who owed humanity a debt of gratitude. Civilians, independent traders, even militia forces from remote star systems pulled together in a sudden, epic show of solidarity. They had not been part of the formal summit. They had no illusions of conquest or claims to territory. They had heard how humans were leading a stand at the Draxus corridor in defense of every species' freedom. And they came, braving certain danger because they believed in the cause. For once, they were fighting not out of fear, but out of shared conviction. Blasted hulls drifted among swirling debris as the new arrivals dived into the fray. They hammered Iratha ships from unexpected angles, launching cunning flanking maneuvers that broke the enemy's momentum. Their presence inspired the weary Arluma, Rabraxi, and coalition ships to rally. Disorder began to tip in our favor. One by one, we targeted the Iratha capital ships, focusing our combined might on each monstrous vessel until it cracked like a cosmic egg, spewing molten wreckage across the stars. The Iratha's relentless assault slowed, then wavered. At last, their command ships retreated into a wormhole, leaving behind a battered but living alliance. In the aftermath, the corridor was littered with debris from countless vessels of every shape and size. The death toll was high, and the survivors were somber. Yet a quiet sense of victory pulsed through our battered lines. For the first time in galactic history, a common cause had united so many diverse factions. Major powers, smaller species, and those who had always stood on the sidelines. Humanity's stubborn insistence on ethics had done more than just shape a moral stance. It had galvanized an entire new wave of cooperation that transcended the old cycles of exploitation. Recovery efforts began immediately. Human medical frigates, along with bony healers, rescued whoever they could from the wreckage. Rabraxi salvage teams worked alongside Velrax's mechanics to gather useful scraps. The Arluma, still struggling with their cultural shift, donated advanced bioregeneration pods to treat the newly freed pilots retrieved from Iratha drones. Former adversaries found themselves working side by side to rebuild. The exhaustion of near defeat had a sobering effect, eroding centuries of hostilities faster than any diplomatic summit could. In the following months, the galaxy changed in ways that few could have predicted. The Rabraxi, formerly so arrogant, tentatively agreed to decolonize certain fringe worlds they had occupied, hoping to avoid further rebellions and to maintain the alliance that had saved them. The Arluma, for their part, faced a widespread uprising of their genetically modified underclass rather than crush it by force. Their leadership, prodded by the same alliance that had offered them salvation, negotiated an emancipation treaty, promising freedom and representation to those who had been viewed as nothing more than living tools. Throughout hundreds of star systems, smaller species were given a seat at the table, recognized as sovereign, protected by interstellar law, and guaranteed self-determination. The new alliance hammered out foundational principles, encoded them in a binding charter, and slowly replaced centuries of exploitation with cautious collaboration. Humanity did not become the explicit ruler of this new era. We didn't have the numbers or the thirst for domination. Instead, we inherited the mantle of mediator. An odd role for a species that had once been considered too weak, too naive, and too principled to survive. We established an alliance assembly on a neutral asteroid station near the corridor. The assembly was open to delegates from every species, large or small, militarily powerful or not. Time would test whether old prejudices and ambitions would reemerge. But for now, the Iratha threat had momentarily jolted every faction into confronting a shared vulnerability, forging a unity that might endure. Slowly, we dismantled the widespread belief that might. The premise of subjugation gave way, perhaps not universally, and certainly not without resistance, but the ethos of mutual respect gained ground. Historians called it the Great Realignment, though the process itself was messy. The Rabraxi demanded compensation for lost resources. The Arluma struggled with the fractious new freedoms in their own realm, and the smaller species, eager not to be pawns again, challenged every clause that hinted at old hierarchy. Humanity found its place not by dictating, but by facilitating, patiently bridging differences. Our morals did not make us foolishly tolerant of wrongdoing. Rather, they enabled us to set boundaries rooted in conscience. If a power violated the new charter, the rest of the alliance was greenlit to respond collectively. Much work lay ahead. The Iratha threat was diminished, but not utterly extinguished. Scattered pockets of their fleet still lurked, harvesting resources in remote corners or raiding poorly defended worlds. And so, a fledgling coalition force was formed, pledged not to conquer, but to defend allied territory. Each species contributed volunteers. Officers were elected by merit. The integrated force's prime directive was to protect the defenseless and deter aggression, functioning as a deterrent rather than a tool of oppression. Its moral foundation echoed humanity's stance, marking a radical departure from the militarism of the past. All the while, back on Earth, we wrestled with our own transformations. The demands of playing a central role in a galactic alliance were unprecedented. Resources were stretched thin, and new industries sprang up to supply advanced ships and humanitarian missions. We had to grow beyond old Earth-centered paradigms, adopting a broad perspective that accounted for countless species, each with their own dreams, needs, and vulnerabilities. Our politics evolved to include committees dedicated to interstellar ethics, conflict resolution, mutual trade deals, and cultural exchanges. Education systems expanded, incorporating alien biology, languages, and customs. Our moral code remained the bedrock, but we learned that upholding it amid so many competing interests required nuanced judgments and adaptable policies. Still, the bedrock endured. No matter how many spats erupted among allied delegates, how many deals got bogged down in committees, how many threatened to break away and revert to old habits, one principle stood unshaken. We would not exploit others for gain, not because it was pragmatic, but because it was right. And that idea grew infectious. Species that had once pillaged worlds began to consider alternative sources of wealth. Skill sharing, open research, co-developed industrial processes. These approaches came to supplant raw extraction. Over time, the new alliance began to demonstrate that cooperation could be more profitable in the long term, even for the most cynical participant. Of course, not everyone approved. There were still fringe groups who found humanity's stance laughable, or who benefited too much from exploitation and resisted the new order. Smuggling rings, slavers, and black market dealers thrived on the outskirts. Some reactionaries whispered that the entire galaxy would eventually circle back to natural selection on a cosmic scale. But with each passing cycle, as the new alliance provided security and economic opportunity, such regressive voices lost their influence. We recognized the process would take generations. Still, the seeds of a radically different future were planted. It helped that our war with the Iratha, while devastating, proved beyond doubt how tenuous any single species' position could be. In the face of an existential threat, it was not the largest guns or the shrewdest deals that saved us. It was the recognition of each other's dignity, the refusal to treat another species as chattel or a mere resource. That was how we forged the synergy that ultimately turned the tide. The lesson was etched into every war memorial placed across the allied worlds, recounted in stories told to children of multiple species. Any coherent future hinged on trust built through mutual respect. Time brought many changes, and years after the decisive battle at the Draxis corridor, you could walk through the corridors of the assembly station and hear a half-dozen languages mixing in the air. Bonnery soared overhead, carrying data tablets to committee meetings. Rabraxi traders haggled good-naturedly with Belrax engineers. Our Luma ambassadors chatted with newly recognized hidebound species from far-flung galaxies, forging negotiations they would never have entertained before. And among it all, humans no longer at the margins paid a quiet, steady role, guiding, assisting, preventing old grudges from flaring into new wars. Our fleets were modest, but every vessel that carried Earth's emblem was accepted into ports across the galaxy. Even the few holdouts who disliked us personally acknowledged that we kept our word. Our moral code became a beacon for those weary of endless conquest. More and more species decided to join the alliance, relinquishing the old exploitative norms for a place in a community that, while imperfect, aspired to a fairer standard. With that shift, the galaxy's balance began to tilt ever so steadily toward cooperative prosperity. Call it an ideological revolution, or a mere recalibration of power, either way, no empire's might alone could dictate galactic affairs as they once had. Instead, influence came from forging lasting partnerships, promoting shared research, and protecting the vulnerable. The legacy we built was fragile, especially in the early years. Tensions flared when resources ran low, rivalries persisted over historical slights, but the bedrock principle of ending exploitation remained. Again and again, one or another crisis threatened to tear the alliance apart, and each time, new alliances formed around the principle of mutual defense and respect. The old ways, too, reared their head. There were secret deals, black market ventures, and even attempts at sabotage. Yet enough participants believed in the alliance's vision to stand against those who tried to reignite oppression. In time, the threat of the Iratha receded further as the alliance methodically dismantled their outposts and offered freedom to the enslaved. Our integrated fleet discovered entire populations the Iratha had forced to fuse with their organic drone. Allied science labs strove to rehabilitate them, forging a universal stance that no life was irredeemable, no being was beyond the scope of compassion. That stance, coupled with the newly minted laws forbidding forced experimentation, cemented an era that contrasted starkly with what had come before. We faced challenges we never anticipated. How to integrate telepathic species into committees without giving them unfair advantage. How to conduct fair trade with aquatic worlds where environmental conditions were extreme. How to respect local customs while upholding universal rights. Yet at every turn, we rested on the foundation that had brought us to this point. It was the trust we earned through steadfast ethics that united an improbable coalition. Without that, negotiations would collapse into the same old cycle of force and submission. And that, in the end, was how humanity ended up influencing the galaxy in a way we had never dreamed. We did not become all-powerful conquerors, nor did we remain a minor bystander. Our refusal to exploit became our strength, calling forth an alliance of the willing. We showed that empathy could be a better engine for cooperation than fear, and when the galaxy threatened to collapse under the weight of its old destructive habits, we offered a different path, one that for all its complexity, harnessed the best in each species instead of reducing entire worlds to pawns. No one knows what the next century of interstellar history will bring. Certainly, new rivalries may emerge, new crises might challenge our unity, and the specter of unstoppable threats like the Iratha could return in some other shape. Yet for now, the galaxy seems a brighter place, woven together by bonds of mutual reliance, rather than subjugation. Countless species have found a voice in the new order. Ancient rivalries have softened. New friendships have blossomed across systems divided by unimaginable distances. And though no one can guarantee a perfect future, there is hope, and more importantly, there is a will to preserve what we have learned. In every port, you can now find a quiet reverence for the turning point at the Draxus corridor. People, human and otherwise. Tell stories of how that battle hinged on one critical factor: the moral stance that refused to exploit the less powerful. Even the biggest cynics among the Rabraxi and Arluma have had to concede that lesson. Exploitation would not have summoned those last-minute reinforcements, nor forged the synergy that led to victory. Exploitation did not inspire loyalty or genuine collaboration, but respect did. By choosing respect, we gained the loyalty of those who faced certain doom. And in that single shining moment, the entire galaxy learned that a shared ethic could be the most potent weapon of all. We continue our journey now, forging alliances, solving disputes, and holding firm to the ideals we once thought might doom us to irrelevance. Instead, they brought us unlooked-for strength and allies beyond counting. In the quiet halls of Earth's new interstellar embassy districts, we reflect on how far we've come since we first ventured beyond the solar system. Our early explorers carried with them a simple promise: we will not exploit you. That promise sounded almost foolish to the hardened powers who saw only conflict, but time has proven its worth. Our moral code has become the binding thread that weaves the future of an alliance spanning distant worlds and varied peoples. An alliance tested by war, but defined by hope. And that, more than any ephemeral prize, is what endures.